He's now permanently disabled. He can't see, he can't hear. He'll be on a feeding tube the rest of his life.
Capital murder. In accordance with the laws of the state of Texas, this court hereby assesses your punishment of death.
This is Dexter Johnson. He was sentenced to death in Harris County, which evoked a tumultuous surge of emotions. Fueled by anger, he forcefully hurled a chair, prompting intervention by law enforcement, while his distraught family pleaded for mercy. Amidst the turmoil, two 19-year-old relatives collapsed and were carried away on stretchers, while Johnson's child's mother screamed in distress. Evidence presented in court revealed a harrowing tale. Aparici and her boyfriend, Haino, were held captive while Johnson and two others threatened them with a shotgun and a revolver, forcing them to drive around Houston. During this ordeal, Aparici was stripped of her cash, credit cards, and coerced into providing her ATM access information. Accompanying Johnson were Keith Ron Fields, 18, and another individual not implicated in the case, while Timothy Randall, 20, and Ashley Irvin, 18, followed in a separate vehicle. The judge offered solace to the audience, including the grieving parents of Maria Aparici. "Are you okay?" District Judge Denise Collins addressed the parents of Maria Aparici, 23, calmly. She lovingly embraced Christina Aparici and shook Protasios Aparici Jr.'s hand. Throughout his trial, Dexter Johnson maintained a stoic demeanor, his face impassive. However, on the third day, his tightly controlled emotions got the better of him. As the judgment was pronounced, Johnson looked up, his lips pressed together, and tears welled up in his eyes. Turning to face his family, he raised his hand in a gesture that seemed almost like a wave, only to hurl a chair away moments later. In a swift response, law enforcement officers quickly subdued him, while others worked to restore order in the courtroom. The scene was one of heart-wrenching anguish as Johnson's family wept, their grief palpable. In the midst.
Jesus, the God! The God!
See you, ladies and gentlemen.
When suddenly,
in the midst of it all, a desperate plea rang out: "Don't kill him." The incident took a toll on several family members, leading to their collapse and sobbing, prompting the urgent arrival of an ambulance. Meanwhile, Johnson's mother, overcome by sorrow, walked through the corridors, her sobs punctuating her description of her son being unjustly judged. Renee Johnson, his mother, vehemently declared, "My son is not a murderer," refuting any claims of inherent violence. Holding on to faith, she confidently asserted, "God will fix this," dismissing the weight of evidence against him. Inside the courtroom, Protasio Aparici Jr., overcome with grief, poured his heart out to a reporter. "Can you imagine how violent he was the night he killed my daughter?" For Aparici, enduring the trial and gaining a harrowing understanding of the extent of his daughter's abuse proved to be the most excruciating aspects of the case. In a pre-trial hearing, one of Aparici's relatives couldn't contain their anger, rushing towards Johnson in a moment of intense confrontation. As the jury delivered their verdict, Johnson buried his face in his hands, only to storm out of the courtroom once the jurors retired to the jury chamber. Prosecutors painted a horrific picture of Johnson's actions. They allege that he brutally assaulted Aparici in the back seat of her vehicle after parking near a dense forest, while the other 4 suspects taunted her boyfriend, forcing him to listen helplessly. Ultimately, Johnson and Fields led a naked Aparici and shirtless No approximately 60 feet into the woods, where they callously shot both victims in the head.
I apologize for my behaviors. Please don't take my life from me.
This is Seandell Jackson. Jackson had been found guilty of first-degree murder and robbery in the case of Nathan Potter, a 21-year-old University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee student. Potter was fatally shot during an attempted robbery as he walked home. Surprisingly, Jackson showed no remorse or sadness for his actions during the trial and even smirked at the victim's relatives while being escorted out of the courtroom. Potter was not carrying any cash. During the trial, Potter's father, John Potter, addressed Judge Rebecca Dallett, saying,
"There's nothing that can be said to bring back our Nathan. But your sentence can ensure that Seandell does not have the opportunity as a free man to inflict pain like this again. Is there such thing as pure evil?"
In a stunning display of aggression, Jackson erupted in anger upon receiving a life sentence without the possibility of parole, hurling curses at the presiding judge. The swift response of law enforcement officers was notable, as they seemed to anticipate such a reaction due to the convicted killer's prior behavior throughout the trial. Deploying pepper spray, they were forced to subdue and detain him. Meanwhile, in the rear of the courtroom, some of Jackson's relatives unleashed a barrage of obscenities directed at Potter's mother following the sentencing. Their shouts of and "God's the judge" underscored the charged emotions gripping the scene. This is Eric Pendland. He was convicted of shaking his son so brutally that he is now permanently disabled. Pendland appeared in court for a sentence on child endangerment charges, but prosecutors said that this was only because the infant did not die as a result of his injuries. The child suffered serious brain injuries and a broken neck, leaving him deaf, almost blind in both eyes, and unable to hold his own head up.
He's now permanently disabled. He can't see, he can't hear. He'll be on a feeding tube the rest of his life.
According to prosecutors, the poor child was 3 months old at the time of the assault. Sharon Lawson and her husband have spent many years caring for disadvantaged and mistreated children.
For the rest of his life, Eric will rely on others to bathe him, dress him, change his diapers, feed him, administer his pain medications,
Lawson said. Prosecutors also said that Pendland's criminal record, which includes robbery and a federal gun offense, implies mandatory jail time in this instance, and they were seeking the maximum sentence.
I would submit to the court that this entire record is absolutely devoid of any remorse by the defendant.
Attorney Jennifer McLaughlin said, but Pendland maintained his innocence.
I've been falsely accused. I've been wrongfully convicted.
Judge Anthony Donofrio informed Pendland that the jury disagreed with him and found him guilty. The defendant bowed and shook his head after being sentenced to 11 years in prison before letting out one more scream.
Man. I didn't do anything wrong, man.
According to prosecutors, the child recently received a legal adoption from the Lawsons and is currently living outside of the neighborhood. This is Ricky Hand. He received a 40-year sentence for a string of armed robberies in Springfield. Hand had stopped the judge shortly before the outburst, asking,
"You just gave me 40 years, sir." Yes. You just gave me 40 years. Well, guess what?
Startling the judge, he shocked everyone in the courtroom by flinging feces at his own lawyer. From his arm sling, he revealed bottles filled with his own waste. Deputies immediately apprehended Hand, injuring his defense attorney in the process. Hand was charged with 30 counts of breaking and entering, safe-cracking, aggravated robbery, kidnapping, and attempted safe-cracking. In a Clark County Court of Common Pleas hearing, he pleaded guilty to 7 of the original counts. Hand now faces an additional 5 charges of harassment with bodily material, 1 for his attorney and 4 deputies, disrupting government business, and retaliation as a consequence of his courtroom antics. Hand had previously spent time in jail. According to Clark County Court records, he pleaded guilty to robbery in October 2011 and was sentenced to 4 years in prison. He had been on parole for less than 6 months when he went on another crime spree. Hand is now being held in the Clark County Jail before being transferred to the Ohio Department of Corrections. This is Manson Bryant. Lake County Common Pleas Court Judge Eugene Lucci sentenced Bryant, 32, of Paynesville, to 28 years in prison after finding him guilty of aggravated burglary, aggravated robbery, kidnapping, and abduction in a July 2018 home invasion.
I made a lifetime of bad decisions.
Bryant said, alluding to his criminal record, which dates back to 1999. I really apologize. I admire you and appreciate your choice. Bryant's pleasant demeanor in court did not last long after he was sentenced to 22 years in jail, triggering a bewildered expression on his face as he looked to his counsel. The handcuffed felon then leaped out of his chair and accused Lucci of being a racist.
The court determines that you have or will have the ability to pay restitution.
Your courtroom, you racist ass. Your courtroom, man. You racist as nigga, 22 years. Racist ass. You ain't shit.
Bryant's stunning outburst prompted Lucci to rethink his sentence, adding 6 years to his term in prison. Bryant risked a sentence of over 30 years in jail.
Actually, you know what?
Lucci interrupted Bryant's rage.
Remember when I said that you had some remorse? When I said that you had a certain amount of remorse, I was mistaken.
As Bryant was being brought out of the courthouse by deputies, Lucci sentenced him to the maximum imprisonment of 28 years.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, you can take him.
Lucci said to the judge, because
The defendant has shown me that he has no remorse whatsoever, and therefore the court determines that maximum imprisonment is needed. He poses the greatest likelihood of recidivism.
I evidently felt he was more repentant than he was. He was basically spewing nonsense at me. Bryant's obscenity-laced diatribe wasn't even his first time cursing out Lucci, who sentenced him to 1 year in jail in 2014 after pleading guilty to receiving stolen goods and urging the court to suck my D at the time, according to Lucci. Bryant, who was on parole at the time of his arrest, must serve his prior sentence before beginning his 28-year sentence in November 2020. His counsel said that he would appeal the punishment. Thanks again for tuning in. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and we'll see you in the next one.